Thank you very much. Good evening. Et bonjour, Monsieur Robitaille. It is somewhat awe-inspiring for someone who went to a two-room schoolhouse to stand before a graduating class that probably exceeds in number the total number of graduates from the two-room schoolhouse over a long period of time. Even when I later moved to a town with a larger school, I don't believe we came close to a school of this size. So it is then with a great deal of appreciation that I was asked to speak to you this evening because, or I should say, I appreciated it a great deal. You may not. One of the reasons that I broke my summer rule of not accepting any speaking engagement more than 30 minutes from home on a weekend in the summer is that CEC has produced some of the most outstanding students that we at Acadia University have received. And your predecessors, many of them, have been among our most outstanding graduates. And so it's a true honor for me to be here this evening and to speak with you. I would like to speak to you, to those who will come after you, and a bit to those who have gone before you this evening. And first I might just say that that little two-room schoolhouse I attended was not a long ways from here. It was down the Avon River in a village called Somerville. And one of the advantages that I had was that I could take my fishing pole to school when the tide was right and occasionally hook a striped bass after school. That was before they put the causeway in, when bass were still running at that time, although I hear they're coming back. And then, as I said, we had a chance to move to a town where there were organized sports, and I had the opportunity to participate in some of those and to even manage to be on a provincial championship curling team in high school and to go and play in the Canadian championships that were held in Alberta that year. And for a kid from the country, that was quite a trip way back in 1959. Well, those were difficult days too. The late 50s and early 60s. Jobs were scarce. I mowed all the lawns I could get, picked berries, did all the odd jobs that we could. Picking berries in those days wasn't quite the same as it is today, at least not on the South Shore. Most of them were wild. There weren't many of the great cultivated plots that we see in this area and down through the Annapolis Valley these days. And then I went on to Acadia University, which was certainly one of the best decisions of my own life. And I loved it and went on to get a doctorate, as you've heard, in chemistry. And then from there was able to return to Canada and start my own university and research career. And one of the things we did very early was develop what is now known as a gene machine, a device that allows us today to make any of the genetic components of life that are so important to the biotechnology and the new medicine we hear about. And then, as the introductory speaker indicated, discovered a class of drugs, one of which is now used around the world to save lives. People whose immune systems are deficient often succumb to a life-threatening virus. It's a herpes virus called cytomegalovirus, or CMV for short. And AIDS patients and transplant patients often die from this virus, not so much from the primary infection. This particular drug is showing real use now in a marvelous and exciting technique being developed in the United States for the treatment of brain tumors. Now, I mention this at this point to come back to it at the end and remind you that I started off in a two-room schoolhouse. I'd like now to turn to your futures today and the futures you have before you. And I want to tell you that you have before you futures that are potentially more exciting than any that have gone before you. But it will not come automatically. You are going to have to work very hard to obtain the rewards that the future has to offer you. One of the harsh realities of today is the fact that we as a people are in financial ruin. Or, as we usually put it, the government is broke. But that means that Nova Scotia and Canada are broke, which really means that you and I and all of us are broke. Not them, us. And since our finances are broken, we have to fix them, which means, among other things, that when we get something from government that we don't need, we are stealing from each other. So we have got to stop stealing from one another. And if we do, we will start working together to build a better opportunity for all of us. Most of the things that we truly need in our communities, we can do for ourselves as a community. Government should only provide global services, those things that span whole regions or provinces, things that are together called infrastructure, like highways, including the electronic highway. We must all work together to supply the things we need locally. In other words, we have got to get back to relying on ourselves and relying on our local communities rather than relying on something out there called government, something that is awfully expensive and that has ruined us financially. Now, one more thing. You as students have to rely on your own initiative and your own good sense. You can't allow anyone or anything to take control of your minds or your bodies. Substances and cheats are the two things you must guard against with all your strength. Abuse of substances will steal your life from you. False friends who would lead you into substance abuse are simply cheats. And anyone who tries to get you to do drugs is your enemy, because drugs will destroy you. And anyone who tries to keep you from studying and who calls you a nerd for doing so is a cheat. No one has ever succeeded without studying. No one. True, some are more efficient at studying earlier in life than others, but they still have to study. Don't let anyone fool you. If you invest an hour or two a day in studying, you will eventually join the top 10% of all Canadian incomes and lifestyles. There is no other investment that you can reasonably make with that kind of return. It doesn't make you a bookworm. It makes you feel free and confident. No one else is going to look after you during your lifetime. An hour or two a day now is all that it takes to be free. And think of the wonderful knowledge that you acquire as you learn, and which is the basis of freedom. I say this because one of the things that is certain during your lifetime will be change. And you must be prepared to change, which means a steady learning pattern throughout your lifetime. Not drudgery, but excitement. Because the more you learn and the more you know, the more you can control and influence the events of your lifetime. I'll bet that the majority of you in the audience tonight already know how to drive a car. Yet the automobile is a marvel of modern technology. Not more than half a dozen of you in this graduating class will ever really know very much about how a car really works. That is, to fully understand its technology. Yet you will all master it, and you will all use it. And you will do so by a learning process that will start slowly and then progress. You expect to have to do that. And you expect to reap the reward at the end of that learning process, the freedom of travel that the automobile affords. The same is true of all the other experiences of life. Young Canadians, you, are as bright intellectually as the youth of any nation. Therefore, the only reason you need to fear the future is if you are lazier than the youth of other nations. I'd like to give you an example of the kind of change that you will face. 4 years ago, I spoke at a graduation assembly in Kings County, and I told those assembled that we should look at the fishing industry as an area of profound change. In fact, it was already in the midst of profound change, but few people truly realized it. I said that the change was already upon us, and that the fishery would be dramatically changed by the year 2000. That we would have moved from the hunter-gatherer process to fish farming. Salmon, trout, oysters, and so on were already being farmed in an organized manner around the world. The advantages of the organized farming of fish are enormous, and they are essential. The job dangers are greatly reduced. Harvests can be planned. Markets can be secured and expanded. Workers are safer, and their jobs are better, more regular, and more secure. Many of the people in the audience that night thought that that was really a bit much. And that was only 4 years ago. Think about that. Put it in perspective. Hundreds of years of tradition in the fishing industry have gone, and they are not going to return. They simply are not going to return. All of that was destroyed in a few short years. One of the world's great natural resources. Another area in which there will be profound change is the healthcare industry. Here we will soon have kits available in our own homes that will allow us to monitor our own health and test for a wide range of disease symptoms. These kits are already available in many areas of North America. We will be able to understand our own bodies and be much better control on our own of our own maintenance than had ever been dreamed possible. And this will create thousands of new jobs in the healthcare. Jobs that are enormously satisfying and rewarding. So the world you are facing is changing in a profound manner. The old inefficient systems will not return. And if we hang on to them, we are doomed as a nation. Canadians cannot compete in the world of the next decade through inefficient, uncompetitive, heavily subsidized industries. You, the graduates, our new generation, and our investment in the future, you must insist that your political leaders stop propping up inefficient, uncompetitive industries that drain our nation's resources and place all of our futures, and particularly yours, in jeopardy. However, I am very confident that Canada does have a bright future. Why? Well, as I told you, I grew up in the country and attended a 2-room schoolhouse. In spite of that, I managed to be able to contribute to the technology of creating a human gene that can save a human life or prevent great suffering. And if I could do that, think of what you can do during your lifetimes. This is the second largest land mass on Earth, and it has only 27 million people. The future belongs to Canada if you are confident and ambitious. If you adapt and if you develop and use technology, you have a better start than most of the youth of the world. Now go get it. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the graduating class of 1994, the parents and the teachers, I would like to thank you for coming here tonight and sharing such thought-provoking words with us.
I will now call upon James Muir for the valedictory address. James.
Principal Robertson, Commissioner Robitaille, Dr. Ogilvie, parents and teachers, family members, friends, and classmates. Well, here we are on graduation day. I would like to begin by thanking Students' Council for supporting the graduating class this year, and the A-Class Executive, Mike LeDuc, Cindy Joe, and Amber Hines for doing such a great job of organizing this year's graduation activities. I would also like to tell my classmates how privileged I feel to have been selected as valedictorian of the class of 1994. To thank you, I promise I won't speak for more than an hour. Each of us is here not only because of ourselves, but through the support of our families. They were always behind us, ready to give us a push when we needed it, eager to hear our accomplishments and comfort us through difficult times. We share this day with you and owe you our thanks. The teachers at CEC have been like a second family for many of us. On behalf of all of us, I extend a particular thanks to the teachers for the work both in the classroom and in the extracurricular activities. You just have a little round of applause. Well, I'm glad that we've made it here, this being our last day at CEC. For a while, though, it seemed that our graduation ceremonies were in jeopardy because of the breakdown in the collective bargaining process between the teachers and the government. I would have been very disappointed if things had not been resolved. Our times here should not just fade away. We deserve an opportunity to polish up a few fond memories so we can take them with us as we prepare to move on to new affairs. The past few days, I've been trying to put things into a greater perspective. I've thought about the past 3 years and how they have prepared each of us for the next few years of our lives. One incident that really helped put things into perspective was that my father bought me a watch as a graduation present. It's a nice watch that tells the date as well as the time. I took this watch home and admired it for a while and decided I'd try and set it. Now, realizing this was a graduation present and I was almost a CEC graduate, I felt I was qualified to set this watch without the aid of anything like instructions, for example. Sure enough, I pulled out the crown, and with a few turns, I was able to set the time. That was fine, but I looked at the date and saw it was 1 day ahead. I would just have to turn the hands through until the correct date comes up, I thought. I started about this long task, and soon after I remembered how many days there are in a month, I realized that this little job was going to take me over an hour. So, at that point, I turned to the instructions. They said simply to pull out the crown again, and that would advance the date much more quickly. Well, that worked much better. I set the date and thought for a moment. I was doing things the hard way, but then I realized there was a much easier way to do it. Read the instructions. That's where our education is. Our education is a set of instructions, an easier way to do things. But these instructions will only help you if we use them. We have been very fortunate to attend CEC. CEC draws its many strengths from its large and diverse student body. 1,500 young people in one place from all over this area. Bass River, Great Village, Five Islands, Onslow, Nuppy Mountain, DeBert, North River, Truro, Hilden, and Bible Hill, just to name a few places. We've also had many exchange students from different parts of the world. Despite the large numbers, many of us know well over half the people in our grade. It seems that the more people you get to work with, interact interact with in school, the more your education is enriched. Many people think differently and have different concerns. The more of these different thought patterns you are aware of, the better you will be able to understand all the different people you have yet to meet. Remember back to grade 10, if you will. We all came into this very same room to take our places in our new school and listen to Mr. Robertson's famous "Don't Get a Job" speech, taking careful note that being a student is a full-time responsibility. Think about the people you sat with at that time and try to remember who your friends were. Chances are that small group of people you felt comfortable enough to sit with has expanded. Now you might feel more comfortable with others who sat not too far away from you that very first day. Many of us were apprehensive about facing a new environment and new people, but that's faded away now. Now we can look upon CEC as a place where our friends are, a place full of many different groups and ideas. We've learned much more at CEC than what was on our tests and exams. The learning we have gained from each other is as valuable as the lessons presented to us in the classroom. Some of these lessons have laid a foundation on which we can build the rest of our lives. A strong work ethic has been a requirement for success at CEC. It takes tremendous self-discipline to keep chipping away at an English essay, especially when Seinfeld is on. Many of us who have had the guidance of coaches over these past 3 years really know what a dedicated work ethic feels like because they have demanded it of us. "I'll accept nothing less than your best" is a familiar phrase in the CEC working philosophy. A sense of humor is always a virtue. Even on rare occasions here at CEC, we've seen our administrators smile. Many athletes, especially basketball players, have had continued exposure to a perpetual spring of colorful remarks throughout the season. Mr. Baker and all his one-liners have had a great influence upon many of us, both directly and indirectly. This influence is so great upon myself that I had briefly considered presenting my speech as a top 10 list. Certain events stand out in our high school career. The memories from CEC show how the school has added to our lives. The cafeteria, the band, examinations, some of us who were fortunate enough to write 6 in 3 days this year, 25-minute lunch periods, which seem to guarantee indigestion for the next few periods, stuffy classrooms, student council campaigns, the musicals, variety shows, the Cougar sports, the many clubs, the teachers, and the announcements, which sometimes seem to generate more questions than they answered. All these things expanded our high school experience. In closing, I'd like us, as high school graduates, to think about our goals for the next few years. School has given us many tools, but it is our own initiatives that will determine how far we go with them. It is our responsibility to make use of what our parents, teachers, and friends have taught us. On this, our graduating night, we extend our thanks and appreciation to all those whose contributions have helped us on our way. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the class of 1994, I'd like to thank you, James, for representing us, because no one could have done a better job.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Cindy, for thanking James. We now come to the presentation of the graduating class of 1994. I have the pleasure and honor of rewarding highest standing in this graduating class by awarding the Governor General's Medal. And this is awarded to the graduating student attaining highest aggregate on the 5 courses required for honors with distinction standing. And I would ask this year's recipient, Julie Angela Bailey, to come forward, please. The second medal that I will present is the Queen Elizabeth II Medal. This is awarded to a graduating student who has demonstrated superior achievement in all 3 years of high school and has also achieved an outstanding record in all aspects of school and community involvement. It is a little ironic, I think, that this gentleman presented me with an award at the banquet a few minutes ago, and I must say I will be more generous with him than he was with me. Jonathan William Bishop. Mr. McNeil, as usual, looks after the A to L's. Mr. McNeil.
Good evening to the graduates and the parents and the friends and the relatives of the graduates and to the staff members of CEC, also special guests. In order to graduate honors with distinction, students take 6 courses, 5 of which are at a high level, and they must have at least an 80% or more in each of these 5 courses. Following students have so qualified. I will first read the prize list and then the student's name. Winner of a CEC Memorial Bursary presented by Mr. David Higgins. Winner of the French Recognition Award. This is donated by a former staff member. We knew her as Doris Bradley. She is Mrs. Doris Burns. This will be presented by Mrs. Rose. Dara Jean Atkinson. A note on the following prizes that are awarded. The National Canadian Association of Physicists High School Prize Exam is a competitive physics exam written by some of the top physics students in the country, in Canada. The students compete first at the provincial level and then at the national level. This year, CEC had 3 prize winners, and they will be named as we proceed. Mike Harvey placed first in Nova Scotia, Kevin Swan placed 8th, and Chris Belanger placed 11th. Now in chemistry, the Chemical Institute of Canada conducts a national competitive exam for the top high school chemistry students. Certificates of achievement are awarded to students who place in the top 10% in each of 3 districts in Nova Scotia. For the Northwestern District, 4 of the 8 certificates have been awarded to CEC students. 2 graduating students, Mike Harvey and Patrick McWhirter, will receive certificates. It should be noted that Mike also won an award in grade 11, making him the first student in this district to place in the top 10% for 2 consecutive years. 2 grade 11 students, Adrian Matheson, who also receives a medal for finishing first at CEC, and Joel Bates will receive their awards at a later date. Recipient of an entrance scholarship to Acadia University. Recipient of a CEC staff scholarship presented by Mr. White. Recipient of the Euclid certificate. This is the math prize in the top 25% in Canada, presented by Mr. McMaster, and also in a math contest, the Descartes contest, certificate of distinction, Julie Angela Bailey. One more bit of information. The next recipient is a recipient of a scholarship in the ROTP program. I will read it as such. On behalf of the Commander of the Canadian Forces Training Systems Headquarters and the Commanding Officer and the staff of the Canadian Forces Recruiting Centre in Halifax, Captain G.M. MacDonald would like to present Jonathan Bishop with this certificate. It signifies his acceptance to the regular officer training plan in the science degree program. Jonathan Bishop will attend Royal Military College and will be employed in the military operation of pilot following his university graduation. This offer represents a fully subsidized degree program, including books, tuition, educational supplies, and a salary in excess of $50,000. Just want to note that Jonathan is the second graduate from CEC to obtain such a scholarship from RMC. Jonathan also receives a CEC staff scholarship, which will be presented by Mr. McMaster. Jonathan William Bishop. Recipient of the D.L. Sink Bursary, presented by Mr. Lloyd Sink, and a recipient of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 26 Bursary, presented by Mr. Gerald Knott, Cindy Dawn Frizzle. Recipient of an entrance scholarship to Acadia University, recipient of the Canadian Association of Physicists Award, presented by Mrs. Matheson, recipient of the CEC Science Medal for Excellence in Science, presented by Mrs. Matheson, recipient of the CEC Medal, and recipient of the Chemistry Exam Award for distinction, and also is a recipient of a CEC staff scholarship presented by Mrs. Fanning, Michael Bruce Harvey. Recipient of an entrance scholarship to St. Mary's University, and a recipient of the Royal Canadian Legion Edwin D. and Clea U. McLean Memorial Scholarship, presented by Mr. Gerald Knott, Cindy Ann Joe. Recipient of a 40th Anniversary Kinsman and Canet Scholarship, presented by Ms. Langell, and a Canadian Federation University Women's Scholarship, presented by Mrs. Cooper, Helen Nicole Lance. Recipient of a CEC Student Memorial Bursary, presented by Ms. Langell, and recipient of the Canadian Association of Principals. She is the school nominee for Student Leadership Award, presented by Mr. O'Coin, Amanda Joanne Lavers. Recipient of the Lockwood Memorial Scholarship to Dalhousie University, and the Horace Mitchell Bursary, presented by Mr. Al Sutherland, Stephen Murdoch Lewis. Recipient of an entrance scholarship to Carleton University, Nancy Jeanette McKay. Recipient of the Canada Employment Centre Bursary, presented by Angela Little, and the Chem Institute of Canada Chemistry Award, presented by Mr. Dave Higgins, Patrick Avery McWhirter. Recipient of the CEC Medal for Excellence in Industrial Arts Technology, presented by Mr. Stewart. Also, an entrance scholarship to Mount Allison University. Also, sponsorship for the Shad Valley Science Program. Recipient of the Mary Withrow Bursary, presented by Mr. McMaster. And recipient of the Thelma Lake Memorial Bursary, presented by Carol Fee, James Alexander Muir. Recipient of the Canadian Federation University Women's Scholarship, presented by Mrs. Cooper, and a winner in the Euclid Contest certificate in the top 25% in Canada, presented by Mrs. Cooper, Sandra Leela Rafai. Recipient of the Truro Daily News English Language Award, presented by Mr. Larry Bent, and an entrance scholarship to Mount Allison University, Martin Tyson Rovers. Recipient of the Ken Staples Memorial Bursary, presented by Mrs. Lloyd Staples. Recipient of the Nova Scotia Freemasons Scholarship, Lodge 43, presented by Worshipful Master Cecil Brownell. Recipient of an entry scholarship to King's University, and the recipient of the University of Toronto Book Award, presented by Mr. Foster, Kyla Susan Russell. Recipient of the Scotia Chapter IODE Bursary, presented by Hilda Hamilton, Cara Dawn Sabian. Following students graduate with honors. The student has received the Truro Bible Hill PC Women's Association Book Award, and that'll be presented by Mrs. Tom Meredith, Alita Rachel Bartell. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mr. Wayne Barrett, Stacy Ruth Bishop. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Ms. Margie McLean, Paula Suzette Cameron. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mrs. Graham, Mildred Aurora Cologne. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mrs. Ruth Pulsiver, Catherine Dawn Cook. Recipient of the French Department Bursary presented by Mr. O'Coyne. Recipient of the Truro Daily News English Language Award presented by Ms. Faulkner. And the Nova Scotia Freemason Scholarship Lodge 112. Master of Fellowship, Mr. Frank Gordon will present. And recipient of the Canadian University Women's Bursary presented by Mrs. Cooper, Lynn Page Ferguson. Recipient of a French bursary, the second one donated by Mrs. Doris Burns for excellence in French, and this will be presented by Mrs. Rose Neil Thomas Fleming. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mr. Campbell, Rebecca Dawn Gassick. Recipient of the C.L. Fillmore Bursary presented by Mr. Campbell, Jennifer Alexandra Gunn. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mrs. Barkhouse, Jennifer Lee McKay. Recipient of the Nova Scotia Chamber of Commerce and the Truro District Chamber of Commerce Entrepreneurship Scholarship, and this was presented previously, and also a Student Memorial Bursary presented by Mr. Bob Gibbs, Ryan Taze McKenzie. Recipient of the Iskanis Chapter IODE Silver Anniversary Scholarship presented by Ann White, Daniel Robert McLean. recipient of the CEC Music Award, and this was presented previously, and also of the Mike Tuttle Memorial Bursary, and this will be presented by Mr. Lawrence Tuttle, Melanie Starr Moore. Recipient of the Kiwanis Bursary in memory of Charles Fillmore, presented by Ms. Margie McLean, winner of the CEC Social Studies Medal for Excellence in Social Studies, and this will be presented by Mr. Wayne Barrett, and an entrance scholarship to Bishop's University, Timothy Graham Pearson. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mr. McMaster, Robert Daniel Ryan. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mrs. Barkhouse, Rhianne Mary Smith. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mr. White, and also the CEC Medal for Excellence in French, and an entrance scholarship to Mount Allison University, Susan Colleen Thiessen. Recipient of a CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mr. Wayne Foster, Mark Douglas Vaughn. The remainder of the graduates, Victor Michael John Adset. Donna Louise Allen. Nathan Glenn Archibald. Rebecca Jane Archibald. Sandra Jean Arnold. Marianne Elizabeth Arsenault. Christopher Scott Atkinson. Donald Gordon Bagnall. Crystal Dawn Bailey. Gwendolyn Margaret Bailey. Frank Anthony Baird. Now, David Morrow Bell Obra, I think that's right, he can't correct me. He's gone back to Spain. He was an exchange student. Robert Peter Bartlett. Sherry Lynn Bartlett. Donald Matthew Beeman. Jason Thomas Beaton. Recipient of the David Higgins Memorial Bursary presented by Mrs. Harris, and one of the winners in the Canadian Association of Physicists presented by Mrs. Matheson, Christopher Ryan Belanger. Mary Ann Elizabeth Berry. Teresa Lena Marie Bessina. Karen Michelle Bishop. Michelle Denise Blackie. Terry Lynn Blakey. Melanie Dawn Blakey. Recipient of the Santa Claus Tour Area Bursary presented by Miss Margaret Perry, and the Bible Hill Kinsman Bursary presented by Charlie Hoyt, Jessie Lynn Blair. Andrea Margaret Boyd. Andrew Philip Bonnell. Recipient of the Trevor Smith Memorial Bursary presented by Mrs. Smith, Brad William Bonnyman. Stacy Marie Boomer. Dorothy Jo Bowman. Tammy Marie Boyd. Andrew Richard Brecken. Christine Marlowe Brown. Donald Ryan Brown. Keith Norman Brown. Robert David Brown. Wendy Helen Burchell Gale. Recipient of the Greg Fraser Memorial Bursary presented by Denise Fraser, and an entrance scholarship to McGill University, Nathan Arley Burgess. Shelley Lee Burgess. Scott Terrence Burris. Robin Arlene Butt. Jamie Blair Kane. Teresa Jill Caldwell. Recipient of a QP 1047 local bursary presented by Valerie Yanta, Robin Lee Callahan. Chastity Dawn Cameron. Shelley Violet Cameron. Alycia Ray Mona Campbell. Recipient of the University St. Anne French Immersion Summer Program, bursary presented by Mr. O'Coin, Stacey Lynn Chapman. John Michael Kavanaugh. Danielle Marie Lynn Chesson. Charlene Florence Clark. Philip Frederick Clow. Diana Marie Clyke. Vernon Aubrey Cochran. Timothy David Cole. Recipient of the Jim Young Memorial Bursary presented by Mr. Bob Pierce, Stacy Lee Connick. Karen Megan Conley. Jeffrey John Alec Cook. Scott Wayne Creelman. Heather Ann Cross. Jason Sean Crossman. Maxine Lynn Crow. Shelley Don Crow. Marty Robert Crowell. Michael David Kraut. Alexandra Francis Curry. Sandra Denise Curry. Stephen Sean Custon. David Lewis DeBay. Dexter Thomas Delaney. Harold Glenn Delaney. Jason Daniel Dixon. Lisa Leanne Dillman. James Philip Duncan. Semity Linus Doran. Tara Lynn Dow. Charles Christopher Doyle. Andrew Roy Dunlap. Mike Andrew Dunning. Shauna Bridget Dumphy. Matthew Allen Eagles. Brian Keith Eaton. Fiona Maria Ealer. Kellyanne Emanuel. Jody Elizabeth Ulott. Jeffrey Allen Fancy. Heather Lee Roxanne Fenton. Jamie Alonzo Fisher. Katie Jane Fisher. Susan Joanne Fitzherbert. Chantel Jane Foley. Shane Allen Foote. Andrea Monique Fougere. Recipient of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 1060 Birch, presented by Mr. George Cook, Laura Lavilla Frazier. Amanda Allen Fredericks. Heidi Jo Frizzle. Recipient of the Keith McKinnon Memorial Bursary, presented by Miss Norma Richardson, and the Andrea Rogers Memorial Bursary, presented by Craig Rogers, Teresa Marie Frizzle. And Gwendolyn Fulmer. Recipient of the W.H. Falkenhayn Bursary, presented by Mr. Stewart, Stephen Graham Gates. Julie Ann Gaskell. Leah Marie Gerard. Tammy Marie Geroa. Tanya Lynn Geroa. Christopher Reginald Giffen. Marvin Paul Gilly. Michelle Lynn Gillis. Paul Alexander Gillis. Ian Robert Glasgow. Elbset Marie Gonzalez. Recipient of the Ron McKay Award, and this will be presented by Mr. Paul Barrett, Janet Leah Gordon. Mr. Barrett, please present the music medal for excellence in music to Monique Fougere. I'll have to ask Monique to come back up. James Allen Gould. Jonathan Merle Gould. Charity Dawn Gracie. Nissa Lee Hale. Mary Elizabeth Jennifer Haynes. Catherine Suzanne Harnish. Jeffrey William Harper. Stephanie Lynn Harris. Aaron Harris McLeod. Scott Christopher Hartland. Kelly Ann Hartling. Stephen Michael Hatherley. Beth Marie Heyman. Kenneth Roy Hepburn. Jill Alexandra Hewitt. Danny Ernest Hobson. Recipient of the M. Lois Smith Bursary, presented by Mrs. Graham, Daniel Scott Hoig. Shannon Louise Hoffman. Amanda Megan Hollingsworth. Lori Ann Holman. Craig Paul Hominick. Charles James Hughes. Amanda Rose Hussey. Nicole Elaine Eisner. Next student is a recipient of a study grant from the Resource Center for the Visually Impaired Trust Fund. And this grant will be presented by Mr. Ray Andrews to Peter Murray Eisner. Tori Christopher Jackson. Catherine Ann Jeffrey. Lisa Marie Johnson. Shelley Ann Johnson. Scott Robert Johnston. Jean Jew. Rhonda Lynn Keating. Marjorie Helen Ann Kennedy. Catherine Alice Kincaid. Lee Angie Knott. Timothy Gary Kubis. Nathan Charles Layard. Stacy Verona Lamborn. Richard Allen Landry. Stephanie Lynn Langell. Audrey Florence Langell. Recipient of the CEC English Department Medal for Excellence in English, presented by Mrs. Graham, and a Colchester IODE bursary, presented by Kay Davidson, and the Catherine Byrne Memorial Scholarship, presented by Mr. Foster, Mary Elizabeth Lavers. Jeffrey Robert Layton. Tara Lynn Sharon Langell. Derek William Robert Learning. James William LeBlanc. Joanne Marie Leclerc. Michael Robert Leduc. Janice Lynn Lewis. Jennifer Grace Lewis. Tanya Krista Lewis. Nathan Michael Little. Jennifer Lee Lockhart. Timothy Bryce Logan. David Stephen Douglas Longard. Michael Donald Douglas Lynch. Recipient of the Royal Canadian Legion 26th bursary, presented by Mr. Gerald Knott, Angela Dawn Lyons. Just to prove that administrators do smile, I'm going to smile now, because fellow Vice Principal, Mr. Hickman, is going to read the remainder of the graduates.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil. Chad Allen McCollum. Daryl Craig McDonald. Denise Patricia McDonald. Shannon Dawn McDonald. Daniel Lloyd McDougall. Crystal Dawn McFadden. Annalise McFadden. Christopher Josh McGillivray. Cindy Lee McKay. Eugene Jeffrey McKay. Neil Andrew McKay. Derek Norman McKenzie. Jason Alexander McKenzie. John Robert McKenzie. Michael Arthur McKenzie. Robert Stephen McKenzie. Michelle Leanne McLaren. Shelley Linda McLean. Tara Ann Lynn Madigan. Terry Lynn Mansfield. Arthur Claire Marshall. Crystal Marlene Matheson. Matthew Lorne E. McCollum. Donna Lynn McCool. Neil Andrew McCool. Faye Catherine McCullough. Jeff Sean McDowell. Eric Harold McGlashing. Mark Scott McGinnis. Tammy Ann McGinnis. Joanne Doris McIntyre. John William Derek McIntyre. Jennifer Dawn McKay. Catherine Ann McKenna. Sarah Elizabeth McKenna. Sherry Lynn McLean. Recipient of the Pearl Sayre Memorial Bursary presented by Mrs. Monica Kemp, Sarah Lane McMillan. Charlene Ann McNutt. Tricia Ann McNutt. Recipient of the CEC Medal for Family Studies presented by Mr. Bruce Fisher, Kimberly Marie Metlin. Holly Michelle Miller. Tamara Lynn Miller. Ayatatis David Miniotis. Amy Dawn Moore. Yvonne Michelle Morse. Tara Dawn Mortensen. Recipient of the CEC Medal for Physical Education presented by Mr. Piers, Joshua Mark Mosier. Michael Donis Monroe. William Scott Murphy. Recipient of the Mike Tuttle Memorial Bursary presented by Mr. Lawrence Tuttle, Thomas Ashley Murray. Scott Richard Roy Noss. Peter Edward Hilton Newell. Recipient of Marigold Chapter of the IODE Bursary, presented by Mrs. Wendy Kitchen, Elizabeth Ann Newton. Julie Marie Nolan. Tamara Ann O'Leary. Jeffrey Oderkirk. Matthew Wade Osborne. Malcolm Clinton Osmond. Angela Lynn Otterson. Laura Michelle Rockley Parker. Robert Alex Pash. Andy Joe Patriquin. Jeffrey Wayne Patterson. Carrie Patricia Patillo. Scott Anthony Patton. Michael Eric Glassy Polly. Recipient of the Euclid Contest Certificate of Distinction presented by Mrs. Cooper, Kevin David Pennick. Chadwick Alex Penny. Ruth Deidre Phillips. Heather Marie Pictou. Andrew Christopher Riley. Tasha Jane Richard. Scott Sheldon Richards. Tracy Darlene Richardson. Rebecca Lynn Robin. Michael Donnie Roberts. Carrie Lynn Robertson. Sarah Leanne Robichaud. Anne Marie Robichaud. Mark Richard Rondeau. Ashley Dawn Rood. Andrea Lynn Rose. Michael Marie Rose. Charlene Marie Ross. Sophie Roussel. John Joshua Rutledge. Stacy Lee Russian. Angela Dawn Russell. Kimberly Ann Sadlier. Sean Francis Sampson. Recipient of the Rob Bruce Memorial Bursary presented by Mr. Fraser Campbell. Recipient of the Honorable F.B. McCurdy Scholarship presented by Ms. McLean. In addition, she previously received the Rotary Club of Truro Post-Secondary Bursary. Joyce Emily Saunders. James Robert Scott. Jennifer Lynn Scott. Sarah Kathleen Scott. Catherine Ann Shillington. Michael George Sinclair. Rebecca Audrey Slip. Corey Allen Smith. Emily Dawn Smith. Kevin James Smith. Cheryl Jane Smith. Recipient of the Dr. George McIntosh Memorial Bursary presented by Mrs. Kathy Boudreau. Susan Dorothy Smith. Recipient of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 26 bursary presented by Gerald Knott. Recipient of the French Department bursary presented by Mr. O'Coin. Tara Leah Smith. Rachel Thelma Ann Sobey. Angela Sodi. Robert Squire. Shane Douglas Staples. April Louise Stevens. Heather Marie Stevens. Christopher James Stewart. Darren Roy Stewart. Troy Donald Strum. John Allen Sullivan. Jeffrey Douglas Surratt. Jennifer Lee Surratt. Joanne Melody Swan. Carolyn Ann Sillaboy. Michael Allen Tatry. Michelle Rose Taylor. Sandra Iris Taylor. Troy Anthony Taylor. Janice Marie Teal. Kamindra Kar Tawana. Suzanne Rachel Claire Toms. Heather Leah Topley. Jamie Joseph Topshee. Jill Christine Totten. Recipient of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 106 de Burt bursary presented by Mr. George Cook, Loretta Dawn Totten. Peter James Totten. Susan Jane Terfry. Ronnie Thomas Trousdale. Krista Dawn Turner. Recipient of the Education Incentive Program for Black Student Scholarship, presented by Mr. Nevin Jackson, Vanessa Leanne Tyne. Devin Michael Upham. Melinda Ann Urquhart. Craig Aaron Vance. Anson Anthony Varner. Simone Sidney Bouture. Amit Fias. Recipient of the G.F. Cameron Honor Award, presented by Mrs. Ruth Pulsper, Brian Scott Wade. Scott Joseph Walsh. Natasha Diane Wasson. Tyler Reed Wasson. Hazel Marie Webb. Bruce David White. Christina Jean White. Tracy Lynn White. Tammy Dawn White. Recipient of the Jamie Shepherd Memorial Bursary, presented by Martha Shepherd and Joe Fisher, Jason Robert Williams. Jeffrey Case Wilmot. Michelle Mary Wolf. Sean Trevor Wolf. Krista Diane Wood. Jennifer Lynn Wiley. Pam Dawn Young. William Arnold Young. Jennifer Lynn Ewell. Michelle Leanne Ewell. Following students have successfully completed the Information Processing Diploma program in the Business Education Department. Jana Leslie Cameron. Kimberly Joa Clow. Becky Jo Fisher. Amanda Jane Halverson. Jamie Charles Hoy. Nicole Marie Murphy. Recipient of the Montreal Trust Information Processing Award presented by Mr. Alan Sutherland, Pamela Joy Murray. Charlene Lynn Nelson. Tracy Lynn Richards. Recipient of the Business Studies Award presented by Mrs. Sandra Cunningham. Also the recipient of the Truro Horsemen's Club Award is presented by Mrs. Cunningham. Tanya Dawn Ewell. Following business education graduates have successfully completed the accounting diploma program. Sherry Lynn Corning. Scott Alden Ferris. Kimberly Ray Hamilton. Dwight Adam Havenga. Richard Keith Hyde. Nicole Antoinette LaHaye. Christopher Forbes LeBlanc. Recipient of the Helen Cox Memorial Bursary presented by Mr. Dennis James. The recipient of a CEC Medal for Business Education, presented by Mr. David McDonald, Billy Joe McKinnon. Neil Andrew McLean. Stephen Gregory Mitchell. Recipient of the CEC Staff Scholarship presented by Mrs. Sandra Cunningham, Sharon E. Murphy. Michelle Lee Otterson. Trish Annette Pettis. Nicholas Dale Shaw. These, ladies and gentlemen, are your 1994 graduates. We now have some special awards to present. It's not over yet. The James Little Scholarship is awarded to the student achieving the highest standing in grade 11. Would this year's winner, Adrian Matheson, please come forward, and Mr. Robertson will present this award. The following scholarship is awarded to the student achieving the highest standing in grade 10. This year there is a tie for this award, and the winners are Adam Pierce and Jennifer Smith. Would they come forward? Mr. Robertson will present. The Cobequid Honor Award is presented annually to those members of the graduating class who have made outstanding contributions to student activities in the school. There are 3 recipients this year, and would they please come forward? Heather Topley, Jean Ju, and Ryan McKenzie. I would ask Allison Bent. I would ask Allison Bent, our incoming Student Council President, to present these awards. One further award. The Senator Margaret Norrie Scholarship will be presented by Mrs. Helen Withrow, and the Peter Brown Memorial Fund bursary will be presented by Mr. Gibbs to Suzanne Duval. Thank you.
Earlier this evening at a banquet, there was sort of a little bit of roasting, I think, of the principal. But the old theme came up again. Well, what does he do around here anyway? Just walk around with his hands in his pockets and, stay out of the way, I guess. I always thought being a high school principal was a rather onerous occupation, but not shared by a lot of people, I guess. If I make it look that easy, I'm flattered. And really, I think if I do make it look that easy, it's because of the people that I work with. And I'd like to say a few thanks here tonight. And the first group I'd like to thank, which is perhaps unusual, are the graduates. Because you're a good group of people to work with. You're very reasonable people. You're well behaved. You never thought you'd hear me say that, I suppose. But you really are. You're a very remarkable group. The prom the other night, I was telling people afterwards, if you tried to find somebody doing something wrong, you couldn't, it was remarkable. But in any case, thank you very much. You've made my job easier. And I would also like to thank the parents. I know a lot of people think that the principal's phone is ringing off the desk all the time with irate parents and that sort of thing. I do get a few of those, but remarkably few. I think the parents are a very reasonable, concerned group, and with Mr. Robitaille said earlier, you deserve a lot of credit. I know this evening is probably more meaningful to the parents than it is to the graduates, perhaps, because it's really a time when things are changing in the family and the graduates are leaving and that sort of thing. But in any case, again, thank you. Also, to the staff of the school, who are a remarkable group of people who are very level-headed, even-tempered, cooperative, supportive, just a wonderful group to work with, and I thank them. Getting closer to home, I suppose, are the vice principals, who are always ready to give the principal good advice, tell him what he should have done to avoid this mess we're in now. No, seriously, they make my job easier. I can go out and walk around the halls with my hands in my pockets and know that everything is being taken care of. So again, they make my job easy. Thank you. And beyond the school, there's central office and the school board, which is another factor in a principal's life. The gentleman on my extreme right here has come into the position this year, Doug Benedict, as subsystem supervisor. I'd like to thank him for his cooperation and support during the year. Thank you. Sitting next to him is Alan Stewart, and I don't know if he's the rose in this or the thorn, but next to him is Chester Sabian, who's Assistant Superintendent of Schools for this district. And the school, I think, looks pretty good as a physical plant after something like 20 years or more. And a large part of that credit goes to Mr. Sabian and the maintenance staff of the school. I'd like to extend a thank you to them. And really the people that make my job easy are, well, one of them is here tonight, are the secretaries in the office. Because when I'm out and the vice principals are out, they're really in charge and they really know where everything is, where everybody is, and how you do it. And I would like to, again, thank the secretaries very much, and Linda in particular. After the recessional, which will take place in just a few moments, I would ask you to stand while we're leaving the auditorium, and we'll go out in the reverse order that we came in, with the stage party leaving first and then the graduates. And After that, there will be a reception in the cafeteria. We would welcome both graduates and their families. Reminder to the graduates about the gowns. Let's get that taken care of quickly. I would ask the following people to come to the office right after the recessional gets out. Jonathan Bishop, Julie Bailey, James Muir, Heather Topley, Jean Jew, and Ryan McKenzie, please. And thank you very much.